Welcome to lecture one of module 8. In this module, we're going to be discussing inflation, probably another very common economic term that you've heard, a little less so maybe than something like unemployment or GDP, but still a very important topic that we're going to discuss. Not only what does it mean when somebody says that we have inflation of something like 3%, but also what does that mean for you as individuals, as workers, as savers, as borrowers of student loans. So we're going to start by defining inflation. And what we're thinking about in terms of inflation, when you look at that definition of inflation, it talks about an increase in prices, an increase in the price of all goods and services. And what I don't want you to think about in terms of inflation is kind of this movement from one point to another. So if somebody tells you something like the price of coffee has gone up in the last year, and so it must be inflation, that's incorrect. Or bananas, they were cheaper this summer than they were today. And again, not inflation. When we're thinking about inflation, we don't look at individual goods or services. We have to think about, okay, all of the goods and services that I purchase in the year, everything from the clothing to the groceries to the gas, all the cost of living that that I pay each year. I have to compare that from year to year. So I have to start thinking about, okay, what were my total expenses in something like 2014? And I want to compare that to my expenses in 2015 and how have those changed? And even back in 2000, what were my expenses? And the change in the total cost of living, that's what we're measuring as inflation. Okay, so how did the cost of me living change from 2014 to 2015? Or how did the cost of living changed since 2000? And so once we start to measure the actual cost in all the goods and services that we purchase, that is what we're talking about in reference to inflation. And so it's this general increase in the prices of all goods and services in the economy. And so we know from supply and demand that not all goods are going to increase in price at the same rates and things like that, because sometimes there might be an increase in supply or increase in demand for a good that's going to change its price relative to other prices. But what we're talking about when we're referring to inflation is the purchasing power of our dollar and how many goods and services can we buy with each of our dollars. And the way we measure that is looking at the basket of goods, the total typical consumer's bundle that they purchase throughout the year. All right, so now that we've talked about what inflation is specifically compared to kind of a change in supply, change in demand, we're going to figure out how in the United States we measure inflation.